notes.
All right, my friends, it's now time for the Soulful Psalms segment of Beacon of Truth. The Soulful Psalms, we take one of the Psalms from the wisdom literature of the Old Testament that we hear in every holy sacrifice of the Mass, and we pray the Liturgy of the Hours, and we connect that Psalm to your everyday lived experience. Now, I am using the Revised Grail Psalms. This was a version of the Psalms that's approved for use by the U.S. bishops for use in the holy sacrifice of the Mass, and this was compiled by the Benedictine monks of Conception Abbey. And today we're continuing our look at Psalm 103. Actually, we're going to conclude our look at Psalm 103. So Psalm 103 is in book 4 of the Psalms, Psalms 90 through 106. And as I mentioned on an earlier episode of the Soulful Psalms, that the Psalms in this book, many of the Psalms, we don't know who wrote them. Some exceptions, Psalm 90 we know was written by Moses, and there are several Psalms in here written by David, because David, again, is the only author of the Psalms that has Psalms in all 5 books of the Psalms. Well, we know that David wrote this Psalm because the prescript of this psalm just says Had David, of David. Okay, so we know that this is one of the psalms in book 4 that he wrote, and I love the way this psalm started off. Bless the Lord, O my soul, all within me, His holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and never forget all His benefits. I love praying this psalm when this comes up in the cycle. I just love starting off praising and honoring God that way, the way that David does here. Um, but we move toward the end of the psalm now. Let's start at verse 19 here. So we're getting toward the end of David's reflections here. The Lord has fixed his throne in heaven, and his kingdom is ruling over all. Right? So when we're living our life, we have to remember that um that God is the king of our life, right? That yes, God, it says his throne is fixed in heaven because that's where God dwells, right? He dwells in what's called the third heaven, right? And so the first heaven, because Saint Paul talks about this in his letters, right? So the first heaven is the earth, the things, the sky, the things we can see. The second heaven is outer space, this where the sun and the stars and the moon and all that. And then the third heaven is a place where God dwells. So we know that God is there, that God's throne is in heaven, that Jesus is seated at the right hand of the Father in heaven. We know all of that, but that his kingdom is ruling over all. So God is the ruler over our lives. God is the ruler over the earth. And so, it's very interesting. I've been thinking a lot lately about this whole thing about care of creation and all that kind of stuff, and how when I moved to Oregon, I had to really get used to recycling and just being more eco-conscious, I guess, or eco-friendly. In Portland, Oregon, we recycle garbage. So literally, there's a separate pickup for food waste or biodegradable waste. We just separate it from biodegradable waste. So there's actually a special bin that you have for food scraps and paper towels and things that biodegrade, and that so that's a that I've not seen that in many other places besides Portland. And that's picked up every week. And so it makes me conscious of the fact that we do have even though you may not be a person of faith, by participating in programs like that, in those recycling type programs, we are honoring God, right? He put us in the garden. He says, he made us in his image and likeness, and then he says that he put us in charge of all of his creation. You know, he said, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it." Right? So be fruitful, ephrata or para in Hebrew. It's the word that they use for like a fruit growing on a tree or a flower that's blooming or sprouting. That's the fruitfulness, right? So be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Kalbash in Hebrew means to bring under control. And so he's given us care of this earth. And so, yeah, although we should become radical environmentalists or anything like that, but we do have an obligation and responsibility to take care of the resources that God has given us so that these resources can be available to the next generations. And so, yeah, recycling and things like those are good things. Giving stuff to Goodwill, and another thing I think cardboard all that stuff is great ways that we can participate in reminding ourselves that God is ruling over all, right? That we're doing these things. You may not have a religious um, sentiment behind what you're doing, but it is a subtle participation in the glorification of the kingdom of God. Bless the Lord, all you his angels, mighty in power, fulfilling his word, right? So the angels are the ones who serve God in that third heaven. Those are the ones who serve God at very different. Remember, there's different levels of angels. There's angels, archangels, cherubim, seraphim, and those are the two that serve closest to God. Thrones, dominions, principalities, powers, and virtues. So those are the nine levels of angels. And so all of them, just like all of us, we have different jobs, different charisms, different gifts to serve God. The angels also have different charisms and different gifts in order to serve God. So Michael and the archangels, those are the defenders. You have the Gabriel, who's the messenger. So you have the different angels. Raphael is an angel of healing, right? And so all the different angels have different roles, and so do we. We have different roles, and again, all of those roles are ways that we honor and glorify God. Mighty in power, fulfilling His word, who heed the voice of His word. So it's not just enough to say, yes, I'm a Christian. Yes, I go to church. Yes, I believe. We have to heed, listen to what God says. And sometimes that's difficult, especially when it comes to forgiveness. How hard is it to forgive someone who has hurt us? But Jesus says, love your enemies and pray for them, right? Love your enemies and pray for them. How often do we, let's be real, how often do we do that? I remember at I didn't watch the whole thing, but again, because I don't watch television, I don't spend a lot of time on social media. But someone sent me some clips of Charlie Kirk's funeral where his wife forgave the person that took her husband's life. How hard is that to really sincerely from your heart forgive someone who has harmed you? Because we still have the memories, we still have the feelings, the emotions, we still remember what happened. And every time we remember it, anger, resentment, it just wells up in us. And God is saying, look, don't forget what happened, but don't let those things control you. Like I remember everything that happened growing up in my house, but so the lesson there is the past helps shape you into the person you are today, but your past does not determine your future, right? A deep, intimate relationship with God determines who you are.
Yeah, and we can't reiterate enough that when we grant forgiveness to someone, whether others might think they deserve it or not, that is us reflecting Christ into the world. Because I don't want to harbor ill will towards anyone, even if they've hurt me and stabbed me in the back and, broke my heart, whatever, because then I'm giving them that power over me for as long as I harbor and hold on to those emotions and feelings. And by forgiving them, it doesn't mean that you're saying what they did is okay. It's that you're releasing yourself and them from the guilt that you carry with you when you don't forgive.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And often the hardest person to forgive is yourself,
So true.
right? That's absolutely the hardest person to forgive. And David continues here, bless the Lord, all his hosts. Because now he's saying, okay, once we heed the voice of the Lord, what's that effect going to be in our life? Bless the Lord, all his hosts, his servants who do his will, the angels and all of us, right? Bless, because Jesus gave us the example. He did the will of the Father.
Mm-hmm.
Bless the Lord, all his works, in every place where he rules. So all of nature also participates in honoring and glorifying God by simply being what God created them to be, right? I love that. So winter honors God by being, well, I guess it depends on which hemisphere you're in. Winter honors God by being cold, except if you're in the southern hemisphere, like in Australia, New Zealand, where winter means being warm.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so snow honors God by not being rain. The sea honors God by not being a tree. They've got it easy. But how do we honor and manifest and glorify God? And that's what David is alluding to here. In every place where he rules. And where does God rule? Everywhere. There's no place where God's presence and God's life is not there.
Yeah, and there's the 10,000 Reasons, the song by Matt Redman. Bless the Lord, O my soul, worship his holy name. Like that, we could sing that because it's an actual song from the Psalms.
That's right. And David ends the way he began with the same exact verse, bless the Lord, O my soul.
For more on the Psalms with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, check out Beacon of Truth weekdays at 4 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio and streaming everywhere you listen to podcasts.